Hey, what's up, everybody? This is GameLogIQ from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, back with another episode. This is episode number 347 for the week that was in gaming. We're recording here on Sunday, the 21st of July. And here with me, as usual, I have my partner in crime, Mr. DBQ Hams. How you doing, DBQ?
I'm good. Traveling a little bit this weekend, so glad to be sitting down and have a chance to talk about some games with you.
Very cool, very cool. And we have a barn burner bushel of new games to talk about tonight. And so, DBQ, why don't we let you stay on the mic and kick us off with our first one, a big title, which we'll be talking about just exactly how big that is as we get on into segment 2. But here we're right here at the outset. We're on segment 1, our gaming experience for the past week. And you have probably arguably the biggest title that launched this week out of several titles that launched.
Yeah, right. There's a number of things that came out this week, and I think that the return of college football since 2013 with NCAA 2014 NCAA football 14. So it's been a while since there's been a college football game. This is EA. It launched officially on Friday. The early access window was 3 days before. That is if you pre-ordered the deluxe edition, the $100 edition, or if you had EA Play and you had 10 hours of access. And actually, that early access period launched even earlier than 3 days before. It launched kind of late afternoon, early evening of Tuesday. So had a chance to spend more time with it. I had purchased the game, pre-ordered the game, just the regular edition. So, oh, there you go. Thanks, Ocelot. They're playing some right now. Excellent. Yeah, it's college football, right? Like we should open with a drum line. Like there is it brings back the spirit of college football. It does so well. It's got part of the challenge of where college football kind of withered was the lawsuit around players and compensation. And in terms of, previously in older college football games, you would have numbers and generic player names that would associate kind of with stats related to those actual players. But this year, or the past couple years, as they've been developing this, they've gone out and licensed thousands of athletes around D1 schools, big and small, and have their, not necessarily their likenesses, but at least their names in the game. And that was, the generic payment out to players was, I heard, about $600 and a copy of the game. And then that went up from there depending on kind of your profile as an athlete or as an NIL athlete in terms of the endorsement deals that you get and things like that. And so that the NIL is part of the reason why they were able to actually bring in names, is that a number of things in college football have changed since the last time, where there are the ability to pay athletes directly for endorsements, sponsorships, things like that, where that was previously not the case under NCAA rules. So, and now you get, playing the dynasty mode or playing ultimate team, you're opening packs that have actual player names in it. The Ocelot here in the chat talks about playing the Road to Glory mode. So there's a number of modes here that it has of course it has an ultimate team mode where you can purchase packs. It has a Road to Glory, as Ocelot in the chat here mentions. Road to Glory, you start as a player themselves. Ocelot, as you're listening to this, I want to know what class of player you put yourself in. So when you start a Road to Glory, you are a player, you can pick positions. You pick kind of, skill positions: quarterback, running back, a defensive linebacker, and a wide receiver, I believe, similar to what the superstar mode has been in Madden for the past couple times. But then you get the option to choose kind of a four different kind of scales of, are you a blue chip? Are you a first a first stringer? Are you kind of a developing player? Are you a diamond in the rough? I can't remember what the final name is, but basically it is you end up playing where it those choosing that depicts your overall skill, your number of kind of starting skill points that you have and traits. So there's a similar to in Madden over the past couple of years, you have kind of superstar abilities, and you've got you have that option in terms of developing certain traits or trying different game styles. So like I chose quarterback, and so similar to Madden in terms of you can be a field general, which means you've got good kind of pocket presence and awareness and accuracy. You can be a scrambler or an improviser, and that kind of changes some of your base stats. And I chose it started off as a 67, so kind of not the lowest, not the diamond in the rough, but the developing player. And when you start there, you get an option of what schools are open to you, and it'll tell you if you are an academic fit. It'll tell you where you would be on the depth chart. So I started with, and you also get the kind of potential for NIL licensing. And Ocelot in the chat here talks about that depending on how high you go in that, it kind of ranks up your difficulty as well. And so you've got ramps up your difficulty. You've got difficulty modes of kind of freshman, varsity, all-star, the equivalent of all Madden. Yeah, I started as a 67 and kind of second on the depth chart at Northwestern because it had a good academic fit, and I was second on the depth chart, but it also gave a high ability for NIL endorsements or things like that. So you've got a number of things to play with in that road to glory mode, and then you go through week by week. You've got some kind of skill trainings that you can do. You end up having kind of time or points that you put into different things. Like, are you going to practice more? Are you going to study more? Are you going to watch film? Are you going to work on your leadership? Are you going to work on your physical abilities? And then you also, depending on where you are on the depth chart, you get into position battles where you go into little mini games. And so I was in a position battle for second or third string quarterback. And the nice thing about those is that you have the option to kind of restart them as you're trying to figure out the actual controls. The controls are a little different than the classic Madden controls. They've added something in the passing where they've got a 4 different kind of passing options. You still have kind of the classic Madden single button, and whether you tap or hold depends on your, is it a touch pass? Is it a lob pass? Is it a bullet pass? But then you get a couple other options, some of which have been in Madden, but some are new as well. Just like the kicking mode has the kind of classic mode with the taps, but then there's the default is kind of a hold, and the you tap it to set the accuracy and hold it to set the power, which took a little bit in terms of learning that. And yeah, as Ocelot says here, that there's a lot of RPG in this in terms of what you do within the week, and also then as you get into the game, there how you play ends up relating to the number of experience points you get, which to level up your player. So that's the road to glory mode. There is yeah, go ahead.
DBQ, the statement you just made makes it sound like there are Fire Emblem Three Houses kind of elements to, I mean, not relationship building.
I mean,
relationship
there are
building
in some degree, right? But they're menu based, right? You're not running around in your locker room or on campus. It is menu based in terms of where you're. Yeah, it is. There is that in terms of Fire Emblem or Persona aspect of going in and kind of managing more of your player than just what you do on the field. And that earns you not only experience, but it also earns you kind of prestige or coach points, which allow you to do more things. One of the things that if you're starting off as a quarterback, let's say, as I did, that because my coach trust level was not real high to begin with, I didn't really have any audible plays. That I was stuck with what I was limited to what I saw or what I called as a player, and so as you rank that up, you get some more options there in terms of additional audibles and things like that. So yeah, there definitely is some RPG aspect in there. And that RPG-ness also runs right into the dynasty mode where you take on the role of a coach or an offense or defensive coordinator, where you are working on not only developing your existing players, but you're working on recruiting as well. So, and in recruiting, you've got, it depends on where you are depends on where you are as a coach. That if you are a coach for a high profile team, you've got a lot more options in terms of kind of top tier blue chip players. If you're a coach for a mid or a lower tier team, you've got, you don't have nearly as many options, or you see them, but their interest in you, or their, what is important to them in terms of draft prospects or NIL endorsement abilities, that those are things that are lower on your ability if you are a coach at a smaller school or a smaller program. And so one of the other pieces where, one of the other criteria is close to home. So, and it does things where it has regional pipelines. So very similar to the real world, that, depending on which school you choose, your primary pipeline is related to that school. So if you're coming in from as Ocelot in the chat talked about Roll Tide, right? If you're in Alabama, you've got a strong pipeline in the Alabama, Georgia, kind of southeastern part of the state. If you're down in Texas, you've got a strong pipeline in Texas. If you're in the Midwest, you've got probably the state that you're in, or potentially some surrounding states. So it really depends on where you end up choosing as a school, that then gives you those ability, or those kind of how deep your recruiting pool ends up being. And then as you go into recruiting, you end up, targeting those players. You can spend time, skill points, kind of abilities in terms of what you do for recruiting. Sometimes that's as straightforward as a meeting with a player, or eventually it works its way up to an invitation to campus. Sometimes you start those recruiting calls, or those recruiting efforts, with simple things like trolling through the players' social media feeds to see what they're interested, what they're talking about, so that when you meet with them, you can kind of highlight some of those in your conversations. You can time your recruiting visits so that you can bring a quarterback and a wide receiver to campus at the same time, right? Like depending on who's on your roster and who you're trying to recruit and where they would fall in the depth chart, that obviously impacts their level of interest. But also you can do certain things that support or kind of bolster that level of interest as well. And that all kind of comes together in the signing days. So there's, you can get a pretty good sense if you've got somebody, if you're trying after a real high prospect, you may not even know until the signing day. So
one thing I want to ask is, we've talked on the show like quite often about how like I love the off season and like all the managerial aspects, and how you like I love being the battlefield general, right, and playing the game, but I also love like the back office stuff. But what I will say, and you go back maybe like a decade ago, and of course the NCAA was starting to like walk off the field at that point, but just kind of generically about sports games, there's been a leveling up that's gone on with like the RPG elements and a lot of the what I always talk about, like the dials and dials and levers and bells and whistles and more things, control knobs that you can reach out and touch, right, and variables you can manipulate. But I think in the past couple of years, that has gotten to the point where it's detrimental, to where so often now I go and this has also occurred for me personally, as my palette of like types of these games that I play has also widened. So, I go into like my EA needs a better name. Football Club has done just fine without the FIFA license. They've proven that, but like calling it FC24, I just feel like half the time I mention it and people don't know what I'm talking about. So I go into Football Club. I've played around in Madden. I've even played around in MLB. And you have all of these. In particular, the scouting game is so mystified, like, and so hard for me again because I have chosen not to take the time to dive deep into it. So hard for me to like go like, okay, like the games that like you can, you recruit your scout, you hire your scouts, and each of the scouts has like different talents, and so that changes like the type of player that they go after or how good they are and all that like it's just gotten so complex to this point that like I'm just like I can't be bothered. Like I'm gonna automate the scouting. Just tell me when you find somebody. But that also takes away a little bit of the, okay, when it comes to decision, it also leads me to also want to automate the decision making, because like I'm not so deeply involved that there's any real ROI on like me.
Sure.
Like I don't have personal philosophy. I asked Brap, Brap last week, back when I did used to do all this stuff. I asked him, well, what's your coaching philosophy? Do you recruit best athlete and then figure out what position they go out, or are you a position recruiter? Because I used to be a person who recruited best athlete, and then I would figure out where people go.
Sure, because you can change their position depending on their abilities. Yep.
Right. But of course, all this is around now. I can't be bothered. So my question is, with NCAA college football 25, how gummed up is the plumbing, and is it accessible, and is it user friendly, and so on and so forth?
I mean, I would say that. I would say there's a lot of depth and detail and nuance. Well, I don't know that I've played around with it enough to say there's nuance, right? Like you could look at Maddens and say there's nuance, but after you play 5 seasons with it, it doesn't feel very nuanced at all in terms of how you scout your prospects. We're here. I think one of the reasons where, if you're going to do a dynasty mode, one of the things you're coming for is the recruiting aspect, because it is different than any other professional sport kind of game, right? Like you are not doing a draft where you have kind of a known quantity. You're also not dealing with free agency in the same way. Although now with the transfer portal, which is in college football, that the transfer portal is definitely a piece of this, where if you have a skill player who is not getting the amount of time that they want, they may exit to the transfer portal. And so you've got to keep, if you're trying to keep players in, or if you've got a sophomore quarterback and a senior quarterback, and you're kind of holding on to him, hoping that he'll be the next generation. He may also, because he's not getting enough playing time, may put himself in the transfer portal. And so there's nuance there. There's a lot of nuance, right? And I think the one thing that for me that makes college sports unique is that you are in that recruiting process. You are in that you have them for 4, maybe 5 years, depending on how their redshirting works out. That it is not something where you are signing somebody and you've got a locked in team that you had. There we go. Yep. Ocelot talks about having a quarterback go to the portal. And so that is part of the depth that you are coming to this game for, right? Like if that is not something that's interesting for you, there's still lots of great college football here. Like if you enjoy college football, or you have an affiliation to a college football team, you can play just a season. You can do many of those things that don't go as far in the weeds related to all the recruiting and transfer portal pieces. But if you want to, like, you can automate a little bit of that. You can have assistants that do more of that for you. But if you're coming to it, that is part of what you're probably looking for as well. So yeah, there's depth. I feel like for me, it's a whole new level of challenge as somebody who's been playing franchise seasons of Madden for the last 4 years, that being able to dive in and has played franchises in MLB and, multiple era franchises in 2K. There's a different layer there. 2K has a lot of depth in their franchise mode around the different types of coaching and training staff and, front office people that you hire that provide certain types of bonuses. But then, it doesn't have that same, you're still just doing a draft, and we're here. The recruiting process gives you something else in addition to your kind of weekly, going back to the Fire Emblem piece, right? In addition to the battles on the gridiron every week as you're playing a game of football, you also have relationship building with your potential recruits and your players that you are engaging with as well.
Let's pull on the MLB thread a little bit because we talked about that last week, right? And I'm sure there's some other like sports comparisons that I want to make, but like for instance, MLB, I find the MLB back office stuff to be really good. Like the best implementation of these things across any of these sports games would be for there to be a checkbox menu of like 30 items where you could individually say, manage that, let me manage that, you go do that. You do that, but don't make the decision. You come to me, right? To like, there's a man in the loop, human in the loop kind of step to that. Like, it would have like 3 different levels, and it would have to. And MLB, I feel like gets pretty close to that. Like, you could tell MLB to manage like a few things, and then there's a few things like I'm like, okay, but I'm gonna manage like my pitching lineup and my batting lineup, and I want to say I have it set to so that I get some of my baseball games. I may have some of my baseball games confused. I think in a previous version, I manage roster moves and like managing, I can't remember what the player count number is, like the 30-person roster thing or whatever for the majors. So in the past, I managed that. But then this year I said, you manage that. I don't really care who goes up and down from, the majors to AA to all that stuff. Like, you manage that. But I manage, right, the pitching rotation and the batting rotation. So there's some granularity to the things that you can. Is it at that level with NCAA college football? Or I keep saying EA Sports college football. Is
Fair
it
enough,
like that?
right? Like, there are some things that you have the ability to kind of have the computer provide or take charge of. Because I've taken charge of as much as I can, I don't necessarily know. I can't speak to all the depth that I might be missing. Like, I agree with you in terms of MLB and MLB franchises. MLB The Show does a really good job with that, in part because of how much necessary depth there is within an MLB 180 some games, right? Like, you've got, as you said, the people moving up and down. You've got your pitching rotations. You've got the draft that happens in the middle of the season. You've got the whole, kind of salary cap, or not even salary cap, because it all depends on where you're at, right? Like, the amount of salary that you have, just like your, in NBA, the salary cap and the luxury tax and all those other pieces, like, there's a lot more nuance there that makes the NFL franchise and salary cap thing be very simple. And here you're not dealing with kind of the money numbers. You're definitely dealing with the kind of position battles. You're dealing with the recruiting. You're dealing with training. You're dealing with kind of how they're spending their time. And so yeah, there are some of those things, but there are some presets that you can do to help. If you don't want to be that far in the weeds, there's some things that you can do there as well. So yeah, I mean, I've really been enjoying what I've been playing. I've got a friend that will start a franchise with, or a dynasty with, as well. And so it'll be interesting to see what the kind of year over year transitions look like, and how the one thing I can't speak to, right, is like, if I have a good season And in my second season, does recruiting become easier? Or if I have a bad season, does recruiting become harder? I'm not that far in yet to be able to speak to that, because I'm playing rather than simming it, just to be able to test those things out. But it certainly seems like the different kind of meters of interest and levels of interest would speak to that in terms of what your potential recruiters are looking for.
Yeah, I would think if you're a school with the popularity of like Florida State, then like you have a ton of people, right? Kids who are interested. But then, if you fall off and become like, I don't know, Morgan State University or something like that, then you maybe have less interest kind of knocking on your door. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Autocon Ocelot has dropped a lot of interesting comments in the thing, and I think I wanted to hear your impressions because I haven't read reviews. I've heard like one or two comments like on a podcast, but I've deliberately chosen not to read reviews. I'm seeing the numbers, and I'm listening to people's personal comments of gamers like you that I know, and a big question for me about whether or not this fits in my rotation. So I staved off of it this week because there was a ton of other things that came out that I didn't feel like I needed to jump for a sports game this week because there were too many other things I was tracking in other genres. But so I kind of delayed it and pushed it off into next week's consideration. But a big problem I have is just kind of like you mentioned, right? Going back to the way that I used to really love playing Madden and what I liked about it, and in this case, it's encapsulated in the 4-year rotation. Like, you're not really going to know how much fun you're playing in Dynasty mode until you go through a full 4-year cycle, right? Until you really see people you recruited like become seniors, and then like that's where like there's a huge payoff. You're like, oh, like here's this kid I recruited him like as a freshman and I redshirted him and blah blah blah, so that has a time thing required of it in a we're going to talk about it a little bit later here at the very tail end of the show, but as I rolled off of X Defiant and then went back to Call of Duty this week, and I looked up and I was like, oh crap, there's 4 days left in the season. I'm at like 70 something percent of the battle pass, and I've been crunching like the last few days. Like, so it's like, and I remember when I used to play Madden, because remember I told you, I enjoyed playing Madden, but I also really love the off season. And how many times, like on a weekend, I would be like, I just got to get these 16 games done, so I can get to the next season, because I wanted to feel that change in the drum beat, right? Of like mixing up the personnel and, new coaching plan and all that kind of stuff. So
I agree. For me, playing franchises, I've been playing franchises in Madden since 2000. That the off season has always been the most interesting part, right? That's where you see the change, that's where you have the ability to kind of shift dynamics. And I think one of the things that I'm liking about college football 25 is that because of the recruiting aspect, I feel more engaged with that on a week-to-week basis than kind of waiting to get through the season and the playoffs in order to get to the off season, right? Because there's not much in NFL football that happens once the trade deadline is done.
Now, is that because of the things that we talked about, where there are these kind of like light kind of Fire Emblem Three Houses type of dynamics, and then therefore you have like a do loop of those interactions that you like to see happening on a weekly basis, and then you go into the game and see what the impact is?
Yeah, right. I think that is, it feels like there's a little something there in terms of engagement that is not just what happens on the field.
Well, very cool. I certainly appreciate that thorough report out.
Yeah,
you
no.
One more comment, sorry?
No, I was just gonna say, like, that's mainly, I've been playing a lot of that, but I haven't got a chance to pick up some of the games that have been on Game Pass this week, which you've had a chance to play around with a little bit here. So did you play these on Game Pass, or did you pick them up as individual titles?
I bought these as individual titles because, like I said, like we talked about last week, like I'm completely out of Game Pass. I'm also unsubscribed from PlayStation Plus. I think one of the key dynamics that I'm kind of looking at this year is we've often talked about how we're not, we in this show are typically not kind of the thirsty type of gamer who gets FOMO and goes out and runs and gets the new thing necessarily. We talk about a lot of yes, sometimes we talk about new games, but we talk about a lot of like last year's releases and backlog stuff on the show. But this year, one of the things I kind of wanted to get back to, and I played a lot of new games last year, but I didn't necessarily worry about getting to them on day one. But one of the things I wanted to play with this year is we often talk about how, we kind of look up from our papers in October, heading into the end of October, beginning of November, and we go, oh crap, we have to do a gaming superlative show at the end of the year. Let me go back to this list of all the titles that I said I was interested in, but I didn't play. And then there's a huge crunch in November, and then you're trying to get that done around Thanksgiving and blah, blah, blah. And so this year I was kind of like, I think I'd rather like play at least a little bit of some of these games earlier in the year, and then like tag the ones that like I want to get back to if I haven't gotten back to them. And that's kind of what I've been doing this year, and I've been getting back to Unicorn Overlord and Ayuden Chronicle and all that kind of stuff. So the big releases this week, and all three of them wound up in Game Pass, were Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess, Flintlock, Siege of Dawn, and also Dungeons of Hinterberg. And all of those games kind of crept up on me. Flintlock caught me because I was like, oh crap, that game's out this week. Dungeons of Hinterberg was, again, one that I think it showed up at an Xbox showcase. I think it showed up also at an indie game fest.
And I talked about it, the demo, over during our kind of Games Fest podcast here.
Yeah, so all of a sudden it was time to like check these games out. And then I was kind of toying with which one, will I, won't I, college EA Sports College Football. And at the end of the day, I said little elements of each of these games really kind of caught a hook with me, and I said I'm just gonna go get a ball. So I haven't had a chance to check out Kunitsugami yet. I got that one on Xbox. I got Dungeons of Hinterberg on PC. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I did pick up Flintlock, Siege of Dawn on Xbox, and I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to the Gamers with Jobs podcast, and I heard one of the developers there speak to some very positive elements, right, of Flintlock. And so a lot of the tail of the tape before the game release was this whole kind of bow wave of word of mouth that got around that the game was a Souls-like. And I mentioned before how the developer kind of went on a campaign about trying to beat those flames down a little bit. And I think where I land with the game, and I'm not that far into it, but I think where I land with the game is that it has a lot of these Souls-like combat loop design elements to it. But then it's really, and I think one thing overall that I'll say from what I've seen so far is it's really a good effort, I think, at intermixing a lot of design elements of a lot of different games that are popular and in the zeitgeist. And often when we say that as a negative. So far what I've seen before, I think that particular design aspect of like, cherry picking from like this thing's good, this thing's like, I think that's come off well. There are some not great things about the game. I think from a graphical fidelity perspective, the game suffers a little bit just in terms of I think the artistic style is fine. I find it kind of engaging. It's really kind of harkens a little bit to like a period piece and like historical fiction. So there are a lot of things that are modeled around kind of like this Victoria era military, and I think that's awesome. Quite frankly, I think anytime you take like a semi-fantasy kind of setting and inject elements of kind of real world military like organization and dynamics to it, I actually like that. Rather than like, you see Tolkien and you see the Rohirrim and you're like, I have no idea if that guy's a general or if the guy he's talking to is a private or if it matters in this world. So I kind of like that element that they kind of have formal ranks and there's like a power hierarchy and that kind of thing. It's just personally appealing to me. But like you can, and I assume the game will probably get patched, but like when you look at I don't want to say skinning, but the skinnings around like the wireframe skeletons, like they're just a little lacking in detail. And they're just not well formulated or great, right? Um, but I think that's what you get, like, when you get like a AA game. You know, and one thing I should mention about all of these games are, Kunitsugami is $50, Flintlock is 40, I think, and uh, Dungeons of Hinterberg is 30.
30. Yep.
And if you're buying them on Steam, they were all discounted, I believe, in the first week. I'm not sure if Kunitsugami was, but Flintlock and Dungeons of Hinterberg were. So I mean, they're, again, a lot of people are, say, AAA games are the problem, big $300 million budget games are the problem, exclusives are the problem, all that kind of stuff. Like, none of these games are exclusive. All of them are $70 games. All of them had budgets less than $300 million, right? So there's going to be some things that aren't AAA from that perspective. Then we talk about the Souls-like design elements and the loop, and those things are in there. There's, well, that seems kind of light, I would say, in the first goings. In like the second increment on, there are kind of outpost takedowns that you have to do, which again kind of, is, Spider-Man is Far Cry,
Yep.
is an Ubisoft kind of thing, right? So there are towns that you go through, and it's really kind of neat. Like, you go into, and they tell you, hey, there's basically a boss in this town, and you can do all the, like, town clearing that you want to, but at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is you taking out, like, the boss, the rebel leader or town leader or whatever you want to call it, and you have to find them. And there's no map in this game. Like, there's no mini map. There's no red dots on the screen telling you where to go. I'm sorry, there is a map. I can't recall right off the top of my head if there was a mini map, but there's no like blipping lights on the screen telling
there's
you.
There's not a marker telling you where to go.
Right. There's not a Destiny 2 kind of thing. There's, so you go into these towns, one thing I will also mention is traversal. You go into these towns and you'll see just like a pile of, like, rubbish, debris, a broken fence, crumbled rocks, making a hill of ruin, not like a Natural Geographic hill. And you look at that and you're like, I can't traverse that. That's the type of thing that they put in the game that you wind up having to go around. You can traverse them. and I found that, like, really, I was like looking at a thing and I was like, I think I want to cut across this and get to a thing. And I'm like, oh, holy crap, I can actually, like, walk over all that debris and rubble. So I was really surprised by that. The game has some verticality to it. There are some faux verticality things that I don't like. Like, there are some roofs that, like, there's an awning outcropping from the roof and you can mantle that. But then when you try and jump on top of the roof, you just jump on top and then you, like, slide back down. So there are problems like that. But anyway, in the second stretch and in the way that it's Souls-like, in the second town, to get to the boss, there's I think, like, 10, 11, maybe 12 kind of enemies, and it's Souls-like in that there's a camp, there's a site of grace, basically, right? Just like Elden Ring, where you go, you camp, you activate it, you tell it that you want to rest or you want to level up your skills, and then when you wake and you leave from there, there's no point where you're going to get anything replenished, right, until you beat this boss. So in between that point and that boss, there's like 12, enemies.
So that piece feels kind of, I mean, that piece is similar in, like, the Jedi Fallen Order series, where you've got a resting point where you can level up or heal. But is the combat Souls-like, where you are, you're worrying about frames and canceling and kind of the thickness of a Souls combat, where, like, Wara in the chat's been talking about that it feels less of a Souls-like in than even the Jedi Fallen Order series. So is the combat lighter? Is it closer to, like, a third person character action game? How does that combat play out?
Well, and that's why I say so we'll need to be hyper specific, right, on the terminology I've been using, right? Like, I did not say the game is a Souls-like. What I said was the game uses Souls-like design elements, right, in its implementation, but it also uses a lot of other design elements from a lot of other different games and different genres, and all that thing blends in a thing that, other people will have to decide if it's Souls-like or not for them. really matter to me. But my point is, like, there's, you know, take like 9, 10, 12 different parameters that you use to describe a game and its design, and that Souls combat loop, right, is a piece that it kind of borrows from. Um, yeah, there's again, there's design elements that are similar to Souls games in terms of, it's not hordes, right? So they're not sending like 15 enemies at you at a time like you would have in like the Division 2 or Far Cry or Crisis. Enemies are buffed at different levels. And so now sometimes you will encounter small numbers of them, and the way they ramp the combat complexity is those enemies have different types of attacks, and that makes that that cognitive load balancing of what you're going to do and how you're going to approach that like more complicated. So in this sequence that I'm talking about, you depart from what I'm calling the site of grace, and that's a good part, Warwana. That was one of the things that occurred to me. We give Souls games a lot of credit for the whole site of grace kind of thing. And I was thinking about it. I have to go back and look at the dates, but I'm like, didn't the Tomb Raider reboot really start that before like Souls games came on the scene? I mean, the Tomb Raider reboot was the start of last console generation, and Lara Croft was doing that before I ever remembered like Souls-like games being like a big conversational topic.
No, I don't know that ever got lumped into there. In part, I think because the traversal, the combat was not in that kind of, at that point, what was Demon Souls, Dark Souls, very heavy kind of frame countering combat, versus it was like, yeah, you rested at the campfire to save or to level up things, but not within the rest of the game. So I don't remember it ever hitting that, or there weren't enough other games outside of From Software stuff that were doing similar combat to actually create a genre of it yet at that point.
Yeah, everybody wasn't like jumping on that bandwagon. So like I said, each of the enemies is buffed and is challenging, in and of themselves, and they present like a different type of combat mechanic that you got to figure out. There's some type of, I don't know what the heck this thing is, some type of ostrich, and the way they attack you is they have an aerial attack, they have like a ground attack, they have rushes and other things, and so you have to figure out how to take them out. There are a number of enemies that are kind of like they feel like out of Prince of Persia. They seem like kind of Arabic, and so they have, I forget what the type of sword is that's like an Arabic sword, but like a scimitar. And they have different types of attacks, and then once you get past like the first couple of, and so the ostrich and like this Arabic soldier kind of show up together. And so, and they, you've encountered them one-on-one before, but two of them show up together. So you got to do things like if you're slow enough and careful enough, you can kind of sneak in to where you're within detection range of like the ostrich, but you don't trigger the Arabic guy. And so you can take on the ostrich like before the Arabic guy engages. But you get past those, and then you get into the actual town area. And the first kind of enemy grouping that I hit in the town area, there was a sniper, a new kind of like Arabic guy, and another ostrich, right? So you can trigger the ostrich and not trigger the other guy, but the sniper always triggers. So once the sniper and the ostrich are triggered, the ostrich rushes you. The sniper isn't necessarily a problem because the range weapon is a musket. Not the only range weapon in the game, but the weapon he has is a musket, which means he can fire once and then he takes a long time to reload. So what you have to watch is, yes, you can take on and fight the ostrich, but you got to watch out for the guy when he does get reloaded and fire another round, and you got to figure that out. Now you could tackle that a couple different ways. You do get a musket by that point in the game, so you can actually, and it's actually kind of neat. Again, I talk about the games that it borrows stuff from. There's pieces of like of Sniper Elite in it, so like you can fire the musket and get a headshot, and it goes into that slow motion animation. Yeah, so it's actually hilarious, and you could take people out that way. And so that was one of the things that I noticed. It took me a few redos and retries to get past this area, because basically when you leave from the campsite, you have like 3 health potions. You have 3 shots in your musket. Those things don't regenerate. And so what you have to do is get past all these enemies and get to the boss. The health potions are the main thing, right? That you basically have to perfect everything up until you get to this boss, so that you have health potions left enough to deal with that person. Um, it took me a while to realize, but I realized like the muskets don't matter because you're only going to get 1 shot off against this boss, and then after that she rushes you and she's within range, and there's no time. With the way the musket works, there's no time to pull off like a musket shot. So I had to learn as I went through this. Yes, I should use my musket shots like before I get to this boss. At least 2 of them. There are exploding barrels that you can hit that will do sap damage, right, to enemies that are going by them. So you can do a kind of trick where you trigger them, they start rushing you. If you get them to take an approach path by one of these barrels, then you can blow a barrel. You do have like a Flintlock pistol, and that does regenerate shots, off of melee attacks and other things. So one of the kind of tricks in the game is enemies will give off like a red glow, like in their heart area when they're going to do an unblockable attack. But one of the things you can do is if you hit them with the Flintlock, when they do that, then they become super vulnerable. There's the Souls thing of like you do a parry and then they become vulnerable, and you can hit them like 2 or 3 times and do like additional damage. So a lot of, a few of the enemy types, if you parry or hit them with the Flintlock when they're about to hit you with an unblockable, then after that you're going to be able to one hit them or just take them down after a few shots, after a few hits. So there are elements like that in the game. There are things so part of the loop that's and this is the thing that again borrows from Souls. There's a thing in it like kind of like runes. I forget what they're called in the game, but basically when you attack an enemy, renown. So when you attack an enemy, you earn a certain amount of renown. If you hold on to that and don't claim them and then defeat another enemy, then the multiplier goes up. And so you collect more of those. And then you finally claim them, and you can use them to upskill or to buy cosmetics when you take down a town and you go to the coffee shop. And so that's another thing that kind of borrows from Souls. Another thing that borrows from Souls is if you get defeated, you drop the total number of renown crowns or whatever that you have, and then you have to you have to fight your way back to wherever you drop them to reclaim them. So there are a lot of elements, like I said, that kind of borrow from Souls games or things that you've seen in Souls. So I've had fun with it, but the thing that it softens to get away from the Souls difficulty topic is it does have a difficulty setting. So I'm playing on normal. It does have story mode, and it has another one that starts with a P. I can't remember what that mode is called, but let's just call it hard. But the thing of it is, if you play in story mode, you can't earn achievements. Now, what I will say is I'm playing in normal, and I haven't earned any achievements of significance, right? I've earned one for changing my outfit for buying a cosmetic, and I've earned one for like dying a certain number of times. And like I'm at the point, and so I've taken down like 2 outposts. It says that then there's an achievement for taking down all outposts. After taking down 2 outposts, I'm at 21%. This is supposed to be a 12-hour game, by the way. So that's another thing that it skews away from Souls likes, which are typically longer than that. I've taken down 2 outposts. I'm at 28%. So there's only somewhere between like 7 to 9 outposts. I haven't earned any achievements. So I'm kind of getting to the point now where I'm like, I don't know why I'm playing in normal. Like, because if I'm not going to earn achievement, if I've done some activity that constitutes somewhere near a third of the game and I haven't earned any achievements, then what am I playing in normal for? So additional combat, pieces of the combat loop that are like Souls is it's timing, it's parry. I can't speak to whether or not it's like acute frame to frame, like timing and precision that's required. It's a little, I would say across a spectrum, there's like Souls far to the right. There's, gosh, I can't remember this is a game I played a little bit of last year, but I didn't stick with it. There was a Japanese game or Japanese mythology game oriented around the time of Japanese unification that was a Souls-like game. I can't remember what the name of this
You're not
thing.
thinking of Sekiro, right?
No.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, keep talking.
So that to me would be kind of in the middle, and then this game is on the left in terms of like how forgiving and merciful it is. At normal, it's definitely less demanding than a Souls game, but those elements are still there. No, it wasn't Rise of Ronin or Neog, and again, it was a 2023 release.
See, now we're all just kind of trying to.
Is it by the
guess GameLogIQ's game? Yeah,
I can't remember. Was it by the Ninja Gaiden studio?
Which would have been Neo, right? Or Neo 2, but that wasn't 2003, 23.
Nah. Yes, Wolong.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
Yep. So, but that all being said, I know like Elden Ring and Souls-like games. Again, I haven't played a lot of Souls-like games. I've played what is the Born game? I'm forgetting it now.
Battleborn? No, not Battleborn. Bloodborne. There we go.
So I played I played a little bit of Bloodborne, and I've played a little bit of Elden Ring. I know that there are like ranged weapons in them, but from my recollection, they don't figure like prominently. But this one like arms you with a ranged weapon right off the bat with the flintlock, and then it arms you with the musket, which again leans towards like like I said, like sniper elite. So those figure a little more prominently in game. There's also a like portal, like a rift system where across the map you can find like rifts that allow you to traverse very quickly. That should be one thing that I mentioned. Souls, I guess, has a thing about like not liking jumping, so this game does arm you with a jump, and pretty much like within the first like 30 minutes or 45 minutes or so, you get like a double / maybe even triple jump. The sliding animation, I'm not super crazy about, but all in all, I'm pretty happy with the game. Voice acting, I feel like the voice acting in the game exceeds the script. There are some points of where certain scenarios I feel like they're skating by and they're not earned, or they don't go deep enough into a thing. There are a lot of kind of jumps that almost feel like plot holes. But I feel like the voice acting feels like A tier, whereas the script that they're voice acting from feels less than. This is not like an Amy Hennig level script, so that leaves a little wanting. But I feel like these characters are developed. I feel like the voice acting, is in a league of its own, and that's also more engaging. And again, skews way away from like the Souls formula, which basically has near silent protagonists and a bunch of like mumbo jumbo that to me doesn't really mean anything. And unless you dive like super deep into like lore, then I don't know how much you get out of that at the surface level. But this game puts that much more so in your face and doesn't allow you to kind of just like walk right by it. So I'm having a good time with it. I'm enjoying it. Probably a game that I will stick with even if I have to drop it down to story mode. But having a lot of fun with it.
And again, great comments and conversation in the chat as Wara's played this game and providing some other details as well. So it sounds more interesting than, and as Down Under said in the chat, right? Like labeling it with the Souls like makes me take a pause from it. But what you're describing is like, okay, I could give this a shot and see how it plays out.
Well, that's why the studio is so heavily engaged in like, knocking that rhetoric down, right?
Yep.
So good. That takes us through segment 1. Let's go on and talk through the news. I know I'm way behind in parading through the ticker tape of comments that were made. I'm actually going to leave Hero Down Under's comment on the screen so I can remember where the heck we left off. But let's go back to talking about EA Sports College Football 25, which sells 2.2 million copies for $100. This story over on Push Square by I don't know who it's by. It's nothing new in the games industry, but it's probably
Sammy
something.
Barker.
Good. Excellent. It's nothing new in the games industry, but it's probably something you're not. It's probably something you're going to see a lot more of. It sounds like a weekend article that the intern wrote. But an eye-watering 2.2 million people coughed up $99.99 to purchase EA Sports College Football 25 Deluxe Edition, which launched 3 days early on the 16th of July. The game is available for everyone from today, that was Friday the 19th. Of course, we should probably stop calling this early access because it's not really. The launch date for EA Sports College Football 25, regardless of what the executives tell you, was 16 July. It's just peasants purchasing the standard edition have been forced to wait an additional 3 days. You're going to see more and more publishers adopt this strategy moving forward. So now what I will say, I probably shouldn't have made the insulting comment that I made before, but at this point I will say this is apparently an article definitely written by a very late millennial or a Gen Zer. Look, you don't have to buy the early access. You can play the game when it releases. Other people, it's just like going to a nightclub and paying the VIP fee, right? Or paying the cover, like if there's a cover charge on the nightclub from 9 to 11, but at 11:30 they drop, at 11 they drop the cover charge, or they let people, like that's all it is. Like, this is people who buy the box seats at the opera. Like, you don't have to buy it. You can just play it when the game releases. Now, that being said, I'm not going to say that there's not a semantic to it. I commented about how, in my opinion, Xbox has a problem when they say game, back in the day before they went to all the new tiers, when they used to say Game Pass is day and date, but then they do early access for Starfield. I'm like, okay, guys, now Game Pass is day and date, but not day and date for everyone. But again, that's not an economic problem. That's an optic problem, a PR problem, a marketing problem. So this whole thing of, well, the game actually launched on the 16th. You just like pull, like, look, there are people like me who don't like to wait in line. If I go to the amusement park, this discussion my wife and I have had, like, we're getting the fast lane pass because I'm not waiting in a line, and I'm not dealing with the kids complaining that we went to the amusement park and spent 4 hours and they got to ride 3 rides. It's like in for a penny, in for a pound. Again, that's if people want it. And what the market has responded to, and remember what I always go back to, is the market dictates what the market will entertain. The market is clearly interested in paying for early access. Why? What value is it to people? I don't know. I don't know that anybody benefited from playing 3 days early. Whatever. But some number of people decided. Now, what I will say before I kick it over to you, DBQ, is I will say I have not yet bought early access solely based on early access. And this is a thing that I think people need to consider who are negative on this marketing trend. When I buy early access, because this also goes to EA College Football 25, there's extra stuff that came with EA College 25. I have done it for collector's editions and deluxe editions of things. Like, so if I buy Forza, and I always buy the deluxe edition of Forza because I want the VIP cars and I want the free car, I want the car packs that come with it for like the first year, right? There's content there that I want. I bought Starfield because I wanted the collector's edition because I wanted the physical objects that came with the thing. So when I buy a thing and it includes early access, I'm not buying it for early access. I'm buying it for other things, and the early access is just included with it. So again, how dare you be mad at me because I want all of that other stuff. So one of my questions for you, DBQ, is now, and I already know what your answer is going to be, but you gained early access to the game, but I mean, was that because simply you saw value in only the early access in and of itself?
I gained early access because of EA Play, right? Because I already had Game Pass and EA Play was a part of that. I think there is the hype around it, right? Like, it is that.
Let me ask you. So you have, but you don't have EA Play Game Pass. You have the Uber Ultimate EA Play that's only available on PC.
No, I have. If you have Game Pass Ultimate, you also have EA Play. And so on console, and so then you get the 10-hour trial.
Okay.
Yep. This is not the ultimate tier of EA Pro or Origin Pro or whatever it was at one point where you got the game or you had access to the game for however your subscription was. No, this is through Game Pass.
So before I let you go on, then, so that's a point of clarification. So then the reality is there are 2 different vectors through which you could have gained early access to the game. You could have paid the $100 thing, but you may have also been just a Game Pass subscriber in which you get EA Play, what I will call EA Play Standard, which isn't even the Uber EA Play, which gets you, as you mentioned, like the game, right?
Right, which
And
is
early
only
access
available on
on
Origin. I
PC.
don't even if it, yeah,
Right.
right. But you get for some games you get the 10-hour trial, and so that's where it came here. And it was, I mean, for me, there was definitely some hype around it, and I was super excited that it launched even earlier than expected, so I could sit down and kind of dive in. But at the same time, I made an active choice to purchase the base game because the 3-day difference was not critical, and the ultimate team points were not necessarily something where I I say this, that the ultimate team points were not necessarily something that I was going to get too invested in. And at the same time, I've already put $10 in ultimate team points. So, right, because it is engaging and they do that well. But the back to the early access piece, like this is this is done for a variety of different games. Most of them, as you said, do come with deluxe editions. I think the piece of the news story here is probably less about the price point and the early access as it is kind of the potential of pent up demand or interest in a college football title. That Madden has $100 version, uh, 2K25 just announced their $100 version and their $150 version if you want to get NBA League Pass with it as well, which is, so their sports games have been doing this for a significant period of time. I think the reason that this number hits as high as it does is that at this point, this was not an annualized franchise. And so it has the newness in it, the kind of pent up aspect to it that probably pulls in more people than somebody who knows what they're getting on a annualized franchise. And so that's where you see the bump in the numbers more so than about the price point and the willingness. And that's where I think it is more title dependent than it is price point dependent for the early access at this point.
So one thing I'll agree with what the article says is basically this is an effort from big publishers to squeeze more money from people, and I don't disagree. But I will say that my personal belief is the causality in that is because I still don't think $70 games is enough. When a game has a 100, 200, $300 million budget, or in this case where, and I know they didn't, this isn't last year's Madden engine. But what I believe is that there's still a big team that's required to pull this off. I think there's a big team that's still on deck, and that's another thing that I think lots of people sometimes don't consider when they're thinking about like the cost of value proposition, right? Is that in the past what we used to do is let's just pick a round number of 100, right? The 100 members of a development team would be, I'll call it somewhere between 30 and 50 core members. The rest of the development team was all mercenaries, people on contract, right? And when the game released, those 50 to 60 people were let go, right? They weren't kept around on deck. Even if you were then going into like DLC and other stuff, like they weren't kept around. We're now in an age where so many things are games as a service and so many things are games as a service like where they have a continuing life cycle. And so keeping those people around costs money. I had this discussion, and I wouldn't quite call it an argument, with a streamer who's a really good friend of mine. I think she's a Twitch partner now. But she was commenting on how she felt like she should be getting more for the number of hours she was putting in the game. And I'm like, look, if I'm a developer and I have a team behind me of 10, 15 people on my scrum team, like I'm sorry to say, but like those people can't eat, feed their children, and send their kids to college on your goodwill. Like I'm happy that you're playing the game for like 3-4 hours a day, but at the end of the day, like does that get my kid a new pair of shoes? Like no, like those are the reality. So the reality is keeping those people around costs money. And so there's got to be not just the recouping capital costs, because remember, this isn't Kickstarter. So companies aren't. This is also in Star Citizen. So companies aren't like putting money into games as you're giving it to them. They front the capital cost to fund the game up front. So that cost has to be recouped. Then, yes, profit has to be gained because profit pays for people's raises. They pay for the next investment cycle. And then on top of that, like the HVAC and the lights and people's seats and their computers and all that stuff has to be paid for. So my personal belief is I still don't think $70 is enough. And I'm not talking about whether it's fair. I'm not talking about whether or not people should be like I'm saying, as I've done the math and I'm thinking about the financial cycle and how all the books get balanced. To me, in my gut, I don't know that $70 provides enough margin for it to fully de-risk the amount of investment that goes into these games up front when you consider the number of other games and projects that are invested in the portfolio that never get to retail shelves, never get to digital storefronts, or get there and are not profitable. So my guess and my belief is that these guys are still figuring out a way to try and make up the balance between what might arguably be a $100 price point that people that may need to be represented per unit sale in order to make good. And so that's, if you when consumers send telemetry to these companies that something is of value, then what do you expect companies to do? So anyway, there we are. The thing that I really love about this story is when I first heard this story break, I was like, is this all hearsay? Is somebody looking at concurrent numbers? But this is actually a financial announcement from EA. And what I really love about what EA did here, because we live so much in a world where sorry, that broke my concentration a bit, where subscriptions cause a dynamic on the market that we cannot tell, and it's very diluted, and everybody's scrambling to try and understand, do subscriptions matter? It's huge that they mentioned that another 600,000 people also engage with the game off of subscription, which now I understand isn't even like the full Monty people, but could be people who had access to the 10-hour trial. But I think again, just on gut instinct, my feeling is that a number of them are people who are paying the full Monty deal with it, because it's Madden is Madden. I'm sorry. Well, college football isn't on PC, so people aren't engaging with it that way. So
Correct.
and there's
Madden
no way to
is
get
on
that.
PC. Yeah, but college football is not. And college football is only this generation, so it's only PlayStation 5 and Series.
Yeah. So that's got to be 600,000 people that were at access to the 10-hour trial.
Yep.
So, but at any rate, it's still good that we kind of, in a more robust manner, understand what the numbers actually mean.
So I want to take your point of game pricing and the potential for higher game pricing, and I think it segues very nicely into the next news story in terms of where the Game Pass pricing that we talked about last week, and how that kind of not only fits in that dynamic of the overall marketplace in terms of what is the right value for the amount for the real costs of developing a game AAA type of experience, but then the news story that you have this week from the FTC.
Yeah, so this news story over on Engadget by Mariella Moon. The FTC is as mad about the Xbox Game Pass price increase as you are. And thank you very much for that, very eloquent segue, BBQ. Microsoft has made changes to its Xbox Game Pass service that are exactly the sort of consumer harm from its Activision acquisition that the Federal Trade Commission was worried about. The agency wrote in a letter addressed to the U.S. Appeals Court. The FTC's letter focused on a recent price hike for the Xbox Game Pass for the Xbox Game Pass and pointed out that the Game Pass Ultimate now costs $20 a month, which is $3 more per month than before and represents a 17% year-over-year increase. And again, I go back to that's an increase from the last price hike that they did in June of 2023. So they've done 2 price hikes in the span of 13 months. In addition, the agency called attention to Microsoft's decision to discontinue the $11 console Game Pass plan. The agency added a new Game Pass standard tier, but it costs more at $15 a month. While it's a step up from the bare bones core plan, it doesn't include access to day one releases, leaving the FTC to call it a degraded product. Microsoft will fully discontinue the console tier just before the launch of the next Call of Duty game. The FTC said Call of Duty Black Ops 6 will be playable via Game Pass from its release date on October 25th, which means subscribers who want to access it on day one will have to pay for the $20 a month tier, and we mentioned that last week. So basically, the FTC has kind of called out in very kind of Tim Sweeney fashion, as he would do on Twitter, has called out Microsoft because what they're claiming and what they're asserting is that, look, Microsoft made all these assertions that these types of things weren't going to happen, and yet here we sit, and the very things that they said wouldn't happen are. And what this calls to my mind is just as the CMA claimed, and again, a lot of people try to push back and fight about this, and I don't really get it. These things are matters of public record. You can go read it. The problem with what Microsoft did with Bethesda, as the EU interpreted it and as the CMA interpreted it, and there was lots of like Sturm and Drang about, well, the EU didn't say that they had a problem with. No, the EU did say that they had a problem with it. They just said that they weren't taking umbrage with that to the point of denying their ability to go through with the acquisition. But they absolutely did say, yeah, you told us one thing and then you did another. So I go back to the problem with the Bethesda thing. In the Microsoft documentation that they submitted, they did not say, and this is what always makes me say when Phil Spencer says, I don't have anything behind my back, I'm like, no, yes, Phil, you actually do. They didn't say that they wouldn't take the game's exclusive. What they said in a very mealy mouth, talking out of both sides of their mouth, highly legalese way, is they said there would not be financial and economic and competitive incentives for us to take Bethesda games and take them exclusive. Now, anyone who read a passage like that would apply common sense and would say, okay, what that leads people to believe is that you don't have any intention of taking those games exclusive. And then, of course, when the acquisition went through, they turned around and did exactly that. Now, again, I don't feel that's criminal. I don't think it's a big deal. I'm one of the people who said, look, the EU can't force Google to give up their search algorithm just because it's the best and they've put everybody else. Like, that's not their fault. Like, companies should be allowed to compete. I'm fine with that. But don't say that you wrote something that you know doggone well will lead people to a certain belief and then turn around and try and be a slickster and get away and say, oh, but we didn't say that. Like, that's what a used car salesman does. And that's not what I expect from, S-tier level multi-trillion-dollar company. So Microsoft has said a lot of things in return of this. They said, well, it's not a degraded product. He says, we've given people multiplayer. They didn't have multiplayer before. I'm like, look, you guys are moving peanuts around underneath the shell. Just call it what it is. Nobody's saying you don't have a right to raise prices, but also don't say, we're not raising prices because of the acquisition. When, I think there are multiple causalities to why they're raising prices. As I mentioned last week, I don't think that raising prices on a digital subscription service is any kind of a news story. But you do have, in my opinion, have to take accountability for the fact that you said of your own volition, right? You weren't going to do things, and then you turned around and you did exactly those things, and you've yielded the optic that now people are calling out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I say that with my pause, right? Because I think part of this, the reason this is a news story, in part for people that pay attention in the game space, is because it was such a dominant news cycle in the game space for so long. I think the reason that the FTC steps up and says something like this is that it puts it back in the court of public appeals, right? Like this is not they're not bringing anything new to litigation. That this is both hey, this is a reminder the next time we bring something to challenge and say it's going to do something, and then we can point to Microsoft as an example of, but I think it is laying the groundwork for a future challenge for something else, or more likely it is designed as a deterrent for people who may be in the pipeline next, thinking about acquisitions at a large scale.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think it goes back to where I got frustrated with the hearings and with some of the discussion right during the acquisition trials and effort was like, it shouldn't be a leap of faith for anybody to look at the record industry and say we paid higher prices because of consolidation. It shouldn't be any leap of like great reasoning to look at ISPs and cable and say we paid higher prices. Look at cell phones, right? And look at T-Mobile finally buying Sprint, and Sprint was on the market for years, and it was, again, AT&T tried to buy Sprint, and it was denied because it was felt that consolidation would be bad for consumers. And then T-Mobile tried to buy Sprint because they actually didn't buy them until like their second time that they sent the acquisition through, and that was denied because consolidation would hurt consumers. And then suddenly, magically, the second time around, it was okay. Like, these types of questions need to be asked about whether or not. And what I will always contend is that, in my mind, in my opinion, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, you take any major service that we are consumers of in America, and there is at no point in the history of the modern world been a point where consolidation over time has not led to higher prices for consumers. When you get down to oligopolies, it will always lead to higher prices. That is an economic truth that, in my opinion, can't be denied. A blog post that I wrote today lamented, Extreme Tech wrote an article last Friday that talked about how the prototype essential phone, what I think would have been called the PH2, that somebody had found it and actually bought it on eBay. And I remember the essential phone. I have my PH1. I'm actually recharging it back over there. But and I talked about how, there was this time in the smartphone market where we had what we called the mid-price flagship. And this was a phone which was generally like $500 to $700, but had all of the flagship parts in it. It had the latest Qualcomm processor. It had typically more RAM than like your carrier aligned phone, and like the stingy carrier and manufacturer would a lot. So it would have all these bells and whistles. Might not have the best camera because they weren't trying to compete with the iPhone and the Samsung Galaxy, but you had choice. And we talked about this, guys who were in the crowd who were on BRAP last week. I talked about like all the phones and phone manufacturers and operating systems that we've lost, like the Palm Pre, the Palm Trio, Blackberries, HTC, Windows phones. And I know that's an intermix of, phones, phone manufacturers and OSs, but we used to have a ton of choice, particularly in America, that we don't have now. And if you're going to look at that and look at that consolidation where our basic choice now are variants of Samsung Galaxy and the iPhone, and not realize that has led to higher prices, like, then I don't like that's patently like clear. So it's unfortunate. It's something I'm happy about. But, the blog post that I wrote was about how, smartphones are all the proof you need that consolidation leads to stifling innovation. Because I would also say that like the iPhone and the Samsung Galaxy, they're not growing by leaps and bounds because they don't have 8 other competitors that are out trying to eat their lunch. So, there we go. Enough of the soapbox. We'll move on. Next story in the rundown is Splitgate 2 is real, lands 2025, and definitely isn't a hero shooter. This story over on PC Games End by Ashley Schofield. The original Splitgate was a fantastic free-to-play portal-based shooter that filled the hole left by Halo Infinite's less-than-stellar launch. Sadly, after a strong initial run, developer 1047 Games ceased working on it in late 2022 to focus on a new project. After teasing an announcement for the past few days, the team has finally revealed its next project. Surprise, surprise, it's Splitgate 2. So that's not a surprise. The team told us that they were working on Splitgate 2. The whole like ad copy when they stopped development on Splitgate was that, hey, time out. We're going to stop development on Splitgate 2 so that we can move on to what Splitgate really needs to be. But in order to do that, we need to make a sequel and just re-architect and redesign from the ground up. We can't, basically they said we're doing a Destiny 2. It's kind of what they said. This is great. We've mentioned this story and this whole history on this show. We actually talked about this also with regards to the acquisition and how, the acquisition will make something like a Splitgate 2 like really hard to compete on the market when Call of Duty is sucking all the air out of the room at a wider scale than it was before. 1047 Games is a team that Splitgate started as a college university project by like two or three like developers. And then they got an infusion of venture capital after Splitgate actually launched. And as they spent like the first few increments of that money, I don't believe that they spent all of it, and I think that's why they were able to move on to Splitgate 2. They realized that they were going to have to make this jump. So this is really awesome that this is coming back. X Defiant is a game that I've bounced off of after the last couple of weeks. And so, we've got Concord that's about to come into the wings. There's lots of controversy about that, about people, disagreeing over whether or not it's going to do what it needs to do or not. So, while I talk about the big tentpole games, Apex Legends, Fortnite, and Call of Duty, I definitely don't want those to be the only things. I think there's market dynamics where I say everybody and their mother shouldn't be making one of these things, but I'm glad to see one coming back and one that found some footing. So hopefully it'll do well. I don't know. Any comments, DBQ?
Well, yeah, I remember playing the original Splitgate a couple years ago, right? It's not in the battle royal space. It's much more in the multiplayer shooter space, the competitive multiplayer aspect. So I'm glad that that we get a date here. So I think your comment about bouncing off X Defiant fits nicely with the next news story in terms of Ubisoft's first quarter announcements, in terms of that they are above their projected rates in terms of their projections, their fiscal projections for the first quarter. So they are above by 8.3%. This is coming from game developer Justin Carter over at Game Developer. And it is that they hit above and beyond about 316.5 million, which is up about 5% from their initial target, and up over 8% from year over year. And so in this first quarter, right, the first quarter for it is April, May, and June. Ubisoft did not have any other big title releases during that time. That X Defiant was their big release. It talked a little bit about that they've had continued engagement with Valhalla and Assassin's Creed Origin in terms of back catalog pieces, that Rainbow Six Siege is still showing good numbers, up by 18% in terms of days per player. But to me, it shows, without anything else that is a big launch, X Defiant was significant for them in terms of hitting above their projections. And I think this is why the segue works really nicely, is that you bouncing off of it, the challenge of a free-to-play game like X Defiant is that, yes, it may perform really well in the beginning, but if that season model doesn't stick with people, or that people bounce out of it, it is not the engagement there. It's not a box copy that people are buying. And so the long-term projections in terms of what they expect to get in terms of ongoing revenue from X Defiant may certainly shift depending on if people stick with it or bounce off.
Well, we talked about that last week, right? That, lots of the prognostications about, Concord is going to do poorly. I'm like, well, okay, but if Concord makes its budget back because they're charging $40 a game, for people, then maybe the fact that it drops off service-wise somewhere in its life cycle it's not financially impacting. Like, you can have all the opinions you want about whether that's good or bad. Like, I don't really care about opinions. Like, the math means that, there's potentially, again, this is the argument and why people think about doing things differently, why companies think about changing up this mixture. The potential is that the risk mitigation and the risk impact is lessened by recouping $40 per game than it is taking the gamble that you're going to recoup it all through microtransactions, which no one is obligated to play. In a world where the market shows that, the oncoming gaming generations, there are pockets of them that like literally think all games should be free. Like, don't pay anything. Like, they literally play Fortnite, earn in-game currency, and then use that in-game currency to buy the next battle pass. So that's the challenge of what's on the market. Let's go ahead and roll into segment 3 and shoot to still get out of here on time. Regular rundown and round robin. DBQ, you and I have both been playing games on the Nintendo Switch. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I picked up the Nintendo World Championship, the NES edition. This is the kind of speed run challenge, a new game on. Well, it's not a new game. It is a collection of 13 different snippets from NES games. So it is the equivalent of trying to capture what the Nintendo World Championship cartridge was, the sought after, high demand, high price, which slices up a couple of game kind of cross sections and puts in like speed challenges or goal challenges, and it's timed to be able to get there. And so this takes those 13 games from Nintendo's catalog early in the NES era. I think the latest is Mario 3, in terms of you get a lot of black box and silver box games. So you get Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, you get 4 different Mario games in terms of Mario 1, 2, to the Japanese version, to the US version, and 3. And then you get things like Balloon Fight and Excite Bike and Metroid and Kid Icarus. Kirby, I guess, is the latest game, since Kirby's Adventure came out late in the NES generation. But that is so there's not a lot of it's a small cross section, and I think one of the things where I am wishing it was more is that it is simply just those cross section and speed runs that you have. If you get if you have an A or above rank, you earn certain things. As you complete them, you earn coins, which it takes, depending on the level of the challenge that you are going for, that it takes X number of coins corresponding to that level of challenge to unlock a new challenge. So it doesn't like just throw everything at you to kind of play your way through. You need to be playing things and unlocking things, and potentially, if you're, you could get walled off if you're not hitting certain challenges, to be able to experience and try some of those other pieces. I like what they did in terms of this kind of speed run aspect, where they have your game on one side and the ghost on the other, kind of showing you what you did. Multiplayer is pretty neat, where you have multiple screens. So in a or online, that is beneficial. I feel really mixed about this game because I want it to be more, but I appreciate what it is. Right? It is very limited in scope. It's a $30 game. It is very much speed run challenges. It is not the NES remix aspects of things, where it not only has those speed runs and challenges, but also throws in, like, now suddenly there's all kinds of enemies on the screen. Like, it doesn't hack the ROM to some degree. It is simply just speed run challenges. So at $30, if you have nostalgia for early NES games, and I think there's value there. I think if you're not a speedrun fan, that value feels pretty limited at this point, because all these games are available elsewhere that you can actually just go play the whole game, which is also probably why they don't put the whole game on here, because you have options to it through Nintendo Online, which is my segue to you, who's been playing some Nintendo Online games.
And the conclusion that I reach from playing those games is much kind of like you're saying. I guess one of the reasons I probably wouldn't have a problem with NES World Championship is, based on the content that it includes. I guess what I would argue, as I'm discovering with the games I've been playing, is I don't really know what the whole point of a platformer is. And the games that I'm playing, the only hook there is to just play them for speed and score. Like, there's no story element. There's like you're just
it's progression, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to get to the end of whatever that end is.
Well, my thing is, to me, I think what I'm saying is it's not even that, because getting to the end of these levels isn't particularly difficult. Like, you could just run through them and never grab a coin and get through them. I mean,
Sure.
There's a couple.
That's a very good point, right?
Master a weird jump or something like that. But at any rate, what I've been playing is I've been wanting to partake in Nintendo Switch Online, because it's the only subscription service that I have retained. And I dove into the Game Boy Advance component. The service now has 6 components, 3 at the Nintendo Switch Online tier, and then 3 in the expansion pack. So I went for Game Boy Advance. I never owned a Game Boy Advance. I owned the original Game Boy, and then I think the DSi, and then the 3DS, and then the Switch was the point of convergence, the Event Horizon. So in Game Boy Advance, what I played was Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2, and Yoshi's Island, Super Mario Advance 3. So again, not having a Game Boy Advance, I had no idea what these games were or why they existed. But it's very much if you've played, I can't remember, what's the current generation Nintendo Switch Yoshi title that I played?
Crafted World
Is it Crafted
or
World?
something,
Um,
crafted something. Yeah.
yeah. And I think maybe Odyssey is a little bit like this, but anyway, it's your standard kind of Mario World structure of there's a level, there's 5 boards per level. You have to complete those 5 boards, and then you move on to the next one. And actually, I will say Super Mario Advance 2, I have played somewhere before. Maybe
Had
maybe it
you
was,
played these on the Super Nintendo, or was this your first experience with these?
but this was my first experience. So maybe one. So so Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3 I've never played before. Super Mario Advance 2 I've played somewhere before. So
So, right, I mean, these are just repackages of Super NES games. So, Super Mario World was a launch game for the Super Nintendo, and then Yoshi's Island was on the Super Nintendo. And so then on Game Boy Advance, they had the package of the Super Mario Advance series, which repackaged these Super Nintendo games.
yeah, so and I definitely didn't play them on the Super NES because I didn't own one. I didn't own a Game Boy Advance. So I must have played them. So I don't know. Maybe they're in the Super NES service on Switch Online too. I'm not sure.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes, they
okay,
are.
okay,
Yep.
okay. So maybe that's where I played this one before and just didn't connect the dots. But yeah, I mean that's like I said. That's I mean the levels aren't particularly difficult. At least not so far. Um, it's again kind of the same comment that we always make when we talk about Nintendo Switch Online. It sure is great that you can create a suspend point and you can just go back to the game. So I don't sit there. This is, so I'm playing in handheld mode. Um, I'm kicked back in, one of my gaming chairs down here, playing these games. And, I'm only playing it for like 15, 20 minutes at a stretch. So I basically do one board, maybe two, and then I create a suspend point, and then I go over and play Super Mario Advance 3 and kind of do the same thing. A lot of the mechanics in Super Mario Advance 3 are super kind of weird. Again, Super Mario Advance 3 is a subtitle. Of course, the game heavily revolves around Yoshi, or Yoshis, because there are multiple of them. And there are some really weird drum beats where like Yoshi turns into like a helicopter and like flies ahead. And then you have to, from the air, search for, the convergence point in the board and then transform back to a Yoshi. And that transports baby Mario back to you. I haven't found the limit I want to say in Yoshi's Crafted World, I thought there was a limit of like 3 eggs, that you can transform people into, and then you have to find power ups that enable you to hold more eggs than that. I think I could be wrong, but
In this one, no, I think what is it? It's 5 or 6 that you can kind of bank and trail behind you. Yep.
it may be. I have not discovered the limit yet, so um, so I'm sure I'll come up to it eventually. But it's got a weird. I feel like the aiming mechanic isn't the same as it is in modern Yoshi. It's like you start the firing mechanism and like the cursor just kind of like like keeps
Yes.
sweeping in an arc back and
It's a
forth, and then
it's a
timing.
timing versus an
Yeah,
aiming, right? Like you don't have a second stick to aim with. You are simply getting the meter as the metronome goes back and forth. Yep.
yeah. So,
So I have a
these,
question. I mean,
yeah,
so this, and I just want to hit this quickly because we're both of a certain generation of gamers, and we're both been playing games that were in a 16 or 8-bit generation where before analog controls. One of the things that I found with the Nintendo Championship, and I'm curious if you find it here, is are you feeling that the analog nub is responsive, and or are you looking for a straight up D-pad that has the more defined spaces? Because I ended up switching to a D-pad when playing the NES games because I've got muscle memory for that. But you don't necessarily have muscle memory for that. But I'm curious because these games are not developed with an analog stick.
yeah. I would say for these, I'm trying to think about how I'm playing for Mario. So yeah, with these I'm playing both with analog sticks, but regardless of like past memory and experience with them, I have definitely hit some of these in the past where I have flipped over to D-pad. Um, not necessarily just for not because I felt that the implementation was bad, but just because I was like, I don't really need the analog stick. Like, it's only got 4 degrees of freedom, so who cares? And maybe it's because I was watching wear and tear on the analog sticks. I don't know, but I haven't felt so inclined to do that this time. So I've stuck with analog stick, and it seems to be fine. So yeah, I don't know, nothing, much more to report on that. Like I said, in handheld mode, this is fine. I think this would look incredibly bad projected on a big screen. So I don't, hopefully
Yeah, I
nobody
mean,
needs.
this is I love these games. I also know that they're 30 plus years old at this point. So, yep.
So
Uh,
last game in the rundown is Dungeons of Hinterberg. And when I picked my head up and realized this game was coming out this week, I asked in our Discord, if DBQ had played the demo. I think Swiss piped up and said, that he had, and I think every report that I've seen, of people that I know who played it have talked about how it was curiosity inducing, but it wasn't like something that made them like jump out of their seats like to go grab. Um, I'm having a lot of fun with this game. In fact, it's more fun to me than Flintlock, and I don't and I don't say that as like a denigrating statement to Flintlock. I just mean Flintlock. Regardless of whether it's a Souls like or not, there's a certain grind to it, and there's a certain inconvenience to it. I should go back to Flintlock, and I should say, and it has a pause button. So it gives you a lot of the handholds that people complain about, like not liking in Souls games. But Dungeons of Hinterberg is just a game, and I think it's partially because there's something in me or my aspect where the the plot trappings of Hinterberg like relates to me and maybe how I've lived my life at certain points or whatever. It's like there's 25 dungeons, and basically the setup is you go back to your hotel room like every day, and then the next day you go out and you take on a certain dungeon, which I don't know if that reminds me of like my workouts or where back when I was younger I would I was doing chest and buys one day and I'd like come back home and I rest and then I start scripting out okay, tomorrow I got to do back and tries, or I don't know what it is, but something like that has a hook in me of just kind of that paradigm of okay, I get the challenge, it's quantified, I just need to choose through it. That's not a problem. Um, you know, Combat mechanics, and so the whole game to me feels a little Zelda like. I know people in chat have jumped on me for going down the path of being like the rest of the internet and kind of qualifying everything as like a something like. And I know that there was a Breath of the Wild like period of tropism on the internet. But I'm using this as just as a descriptive term to help for people who haven't seen it. Unfortunately, I don't have any gameplay video that I've captured yet, but it feels a little Zelda like. There's definitely a puzzle element to it. Like each dungeon has some part of a puzzle. So far, they haven't been particularly daunting. Although I have hit one where, like, and again, this is just a problem that I have, where like if I hit a puzzle and I don't immediately get it, it just starts making me tired, right? So then I have problems staying awake. So the second puzzle that I hit, major puzzle that I hit, was this whole thing of like the moving things around to make rail cars go down like the right kind of path. So, but at any rate, each dungeon will have a boss or a mini boss or a mini boss and a boss. At least so far. They have their own combat mechanics. They have modes that they'll go into, kind of like your standard and traditional boss. So far, I haven't found any of them to be insurmountable. This is not like the megacopter thing where like their attacks are just so OP, like it just gets ridiculous. They seem to be surmountable. And there's different enemies that you encounter as you go up. I'm trying to remember. 'Cause I think I'm getting confused. I didn't talk about one of the nice things about Flintlock is even in the first hour, it gives you like a number of tools. It doesn't limit you to just a melee attack in one range. Like in Flintlock, within like the first 2 hours, you have like 8 different ways to proceed about going down and dismantling an enemy. And in And in Dungeons of Hinterberg, you have your melee attack. You eventually get like magic attacks. Um, like I said, there's a lot of kind of physics puzzles with like where you have to like lean. Like the magic isn't just for offensive use. In many cases, the magic is like a manner for you to project and interact with things that like you can't reach, or through like bars in a cage, or a barred gate. So they're also part of the puzzle solving element of you moving around the level.
And from what I read,
um
the magic changes depending on the biome that you're in as well.
yeah, that may be the case. I just don't. I think I've only been to the first biome where you incorporate magic. There's a store where you can go through and get like additional weapons and level ups and things like that. Uh, it's labeled as kind of a cozy game. It is like cell shaded graphics, so it's very kind of easy on the eyes. Um, but like I said, just that, and you get a stamp book, and the key thing about the stamp book is like if you complete a dungeon and exit the dungeon without getting your book stamped, then as far as I can tell, at least through the warnings they give you, it's like you didn't complete the dungeon. So make sure you get your book stamped, kind of like your passport, right, when you're gonna leave a dungeon. But yeah, I've had a good time with it. The boss, even though like I've mentioned over the last few weeks with the Elden Ring conversation, I'm just a person who traditionally and historically doesn't like boss designs. It's just kind of that overarching trope and element within games. But I do find that these bosses are the types of bosses that I like. Like they provide you some variety and type of enemy, but they're not like a Doom Eternal boss where like you get the BFG and then you encounter Marauders and the freaking BFG doesn't work on them. Like I'm still angry about that. Um, so so the bosses are neat. I will say there is kind of a I do kind of wish that they had kind of a I go back to like these Super Mario games that I've been playing. Which the nice thing about these Super Mario things is there's a visual thing that like when you've hit the halfway point on a level. You don't necessarily have that in Dungeons of Hinterberg, so it gets a little sketchy. Like there was one point, the first yesterday where the boss I was encountering, I was like, oh, okay, this is the boss that ends the level, and I'm like, oh no, that's just the mini boss. Like, there's another boss after that. But as far as I can remember, and it's been a couple days since I played, but I believe unlike Flintlock, one of the big differences in Dungeons of Hinterberg is everything replenishes right in the course of like the game. Like there's no like limited item that you only have so many shots of or whatever. Um, so it's pretty neat. Like I said, it's only a $30 game. I can't remember how long to beat is in that.
From what I've heard, 6 to 8, maybe in that space.
Yeah. Which I need to get my mind wrapped around that. It's that short with the 25 dungeons, because I feel like the 25 dungeons will still take you some time to crunch through.
I was surprised when you said 25 dungeons because I had listened to a review that put it at about 6 to 8 hours. So
yeah. I will also say that there's also part like it's not just a mechanical game, so like there's a story to it, and maybe that's part of the thing too, that maybe the story relates to me as well.
Yeah. And there are like relationships, or you're getting tales and backstory from different characters in that world.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just got presented like the book of like all your like social context and network that you can like establish. So there is that, again, Fire Emblem Three Houses type of aspect to it. Again, not that deep as far as like semi romantic relationship building interests. But there is that thing of like, look, there are different people in the town that can help you, and you establishing a relationship with them, will flower and yield to other things. So any like, you're a big indie fan, any thoughts that you're gonna pick this? Have you wishlisted this on Steam, DBQ?
Oh yeah, I did wishlist it. It's on Game Pass. I really enjoyed the demo that I played, and so I just with college football and travel taking up much of my week, I didn't get a chance to play Dungeons of Hindenburg, and so it is on my list for next week for sure.
Oh, very cool. We are over time, so I apologize about taking you over, DBQ. Up next for me, I'm going to continue plugging away at Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. Season 4 is wrapping up here in a couple days. I think Season 5 technically starts on Wednesday, so I'm having problems trying to figure out why the game's telling me there are 2 days left in this season, but then there's like 3 days left before the thing launches. But so I may have some wiggle room and extra time. I'm at 91% on the Battle Pass, so That 9% more is about 3 more hours of gameplay. So we will see how it goes. I've also, charged up my Steam Deck OLED over on the backside of the room, and I'm planning on getting into some variants of Red Faction. It's very interesting that Red Faction Gorilla is like 31 gigabytes, but Red Faction Gorilla Remastered is like 31 gigabytes, but Red Faction Gorilla itself is like 7. So I'm like, that all like 4K assets or what? So I'm curious what that is. And then there's also other games in the Red Faction series that, I played the original Red Faction and loved it. It's like $2 on Steam right now. And there's some other Red Faction titles and variants in there that I may get into as well. Oh, this is interesting, DBQ. So for you next?
Yeah, and as I said just shortly ago, I'll be playing some Dungeons in Hinterberg. So, yep, it'll be fun to kind of compare notes on the game next week.
Yeah, hopefully I'll re-solidify my memory of it. I definitely am suffering from Flintlock Siege of Dawn brain block because I played Hinterberg first and then stepped away to spool up on Flintlock, and that has a little more depth and variance to it, and things to pay attention to. So, but yeah, definitely planning on getting back to Dungeons of Hinterberg myself next week. So, for everybody who came through the live chat, we appreciate you. Very active chat today. We appreciate it. Sorry, we're trying to move quickly and get out of here at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we're a little bit over tonight, but unfortunately we didn't get a chance to read everyone's comments, but I have tried to bring them up on screen. And I have read through them. So, very much appreciate it and appreciate you guys showing up. For anybody who came to the live stream tonight, we appreciate you. For anybody who happens to listen to this podcast, on delay, on the VOD, on the archive version, on the YouTube, on the E2KG network, YouTube podcasting channel on YouTube. We appreciate you as well. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever we post new content. We'll be back next week with either Tau Master at the helm, but if he is tied up with more athletics, DBQ will be taking the con. And I will be backing one of them up on both engineering and as co-host. So until next time, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like and come here to talk to us about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been GameLogIQ from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, here with my co-host DBQ Hams. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.